All right, so thanks everyone for joining me for my session. I call it as a deep dive, but I'm gonna start with the shallow, where we're gonna touch base few things, and then we're gonna go one layer below and below and below, where we're gonna deep dive into each of the steps. Can anyone tell me what we're gonna talk about by looking at the title? That's correct, how you can run your scripts. Thank you. All right, so I'm Samir Makwana. I'm Microsoft Certified Trainer. And before I go and say something, I would like to thank all the sponsors for arranging this amazing event and bringing all the crowd and energy together, right? Thanks. So before I start, guess where I'm from? Almost there, but yes, I'm like 200 kilometers north of Toronto. There is a small town called Collingwood, and this is my backyard. Oh, that's good. Great. All right. So yeah, I'm Samir Makwana. I'm a cloud solution architect. I recently got my Microsoft Certified Trainer thing. I do not only automation piece, but also I integrate different technologies to bring automation at the next level. So I work with federal and provincial clients in a different level. This is the QR code for my LinkedIn and some of the links. But before I go further, let me go back and talk about this QR code. This is a QR code for the lab, which I'm going to demo you today. It has the detailed steps and all the stuff on that OneDrive. So if you guys want to try it at home, please feel free to go there. I might upload some PPT on that too after this presentation. So, okay. Very good. All right. Perfect. Yeah. So the agenda for the day, I'm gonna talk about how we're gonna have this 90-minute together, like approach of that. Then we're gonna jump into challenges, the introduction of the Azure function, and right after that, I'm gonna jump in the demo where I'm gonna show you Copilot Studio in Teams assisting user for missing email. Now you might think why I'm talking about Copilot Studio, but I will not. I said I'll start with something shallow where I'll show you the whole product, the end-to-end automation demo, but then I'm going to deep dive into one of the specific piece of that automation, which is running the PowerShell on Azure function, okay? And then I'll show you some Visio, the workflow, how I see the integration between those products, and so on. Then we're going to deep dive into the Azure function where I'm going to create Azure function. I'm going to load PowerShell. I'm going to do the same thing which I'm going to do in the first demo. And then I'm going to talk about some use cases. And also then after best practices, different ways of doing the same automation which I'm going to show you today. And eventually there will be a little quiz at the end just to keep everyone awake throughout the session. And then I'll open the floor for Q&A, and feel free to interrupt me in the between as well if you have any questions or any concerns, okay? And at the end, very important, the feedback. I really love to hear from all of you at the end of the session as well, okay? So coming back to approach, so the approach I take is most of the time demo so that I can show you how the things looks like in actual automation scenario. It might not be the perfect, it might not have the 100% security hardening, everything, but it was just to show you a proof of concept. So if you're going to your senior leadership or a customer, talking to them about how these products work together seamlessly, right? That is what I'm trying to do here too, just to show you how it looks end to end. Then we're gonna deep dive into specific function of that whole automation, which is Azure Function and PowerShell, and the quiz and the Q&A and the feedback at the end, okay? By the way, for the quiz, there will be Slido, so you can use your phone to scan the QR code and fill the quiz afterwards, okay? Yeah, so let's start with the first question I have for you guys. what are the challenges of running PowerShell script automation on on-premise versus cloud infrastructure? So if you're running a PowerShell script on a server or on a computer, doesn't matter. If you're running on a scheduled interval, do you face any challenges, or have you observed anything which you want to see to go away, or you think it might be better to go with the cloud? Yeah? And this is the test for the Slido as well. You can try it and see if that helps, because that will eventually be used for the quiz too. So I'll come to know if the Slido is working as expected. Thank you. Yeah, multi-connections are needed. Yeah, hosting system, authentication, network line of sight, authentication. Yeah, it's coming out. MFA, security. Wow, okay. Version control, scheduling, interesting. Scalability, redundancy, resources, resilience, great. So all of these things may not be like, I would say you can still achieve on-premise, but it's good to have a serverless or stateless automation hosting somewhere where you don't need to worry about maintaining the underlying infrastructure, and you rather focus on actual automation where you use the services as a platform, right? So the challenges which you guys mentioned, some of them I just summarize here: the version control and modules discrepancies. So you need to keep up with the modules which are there, and whenever there is a change in the module version, you go ahead and update them, right, when you are on-premise. When it goes to the cloud in Azure, there are features called managed dependencies in Azure Function, which you can configure it in a way that it will always try to keep you with the whatever version you define with it, right? Resource restriction. So when you host a automation on a server, you have limited resources. So if there is a scalability issue, whenever you try to run some more load on those automations, it will be very difficult to scale that to the next level. So you need to, again, build those new servers or add some more resources, right? Security vulnerabilities. So keeping up with those Windows patching, security patching, and so on, right? I heard about authentication and MFA in the Slido as well, right? So yes, definitely, those are the key thing which you can overcome from moving those automations to the Azure. And of course, operational overhead, right? Who's gonna patch those boxes and maintain them and secure them when you are on-premise, right? It will be debate between Windows team and the application team who's gonna do those stuff, right? And integration limitations. That's one of the big things. I see it when you are on-premise, unless you are dealing with APIs, where you call those APIs through PowerShell, right? But integration is one of the biggest limitation, I would say, when you are on-premise, because you need to work with different firewall ports. You need to work with the different APIs if there is one. If none, then you need to think how you can seamlessly move to the cloud and see how things goes. So that's where the Azure Function helps. Azure Function is nothing but a serverless application, I would say, where you just focus on hosting your scripts, PowerShell scripts, and let it run on different schedule or trigger, right? So for example, you have a script which goes weekly into your Active Directory and pulls the report, right? You're running on a server on-premise. Now you are in Azure. You want to do the similar reporting for Azure. You can still do it from on-premise. You can connect to Azure and do those reporting. But you need to still maintain those boxes on-premise, right? So how about moving that script to the Azure function and let it run on the schedule, right? Or you might want to integrate that Azure function with one of the trigger where you can click on the button and that will trigger that Azure function on demand rather than waiting for someone to go and run the scripts, right? And yeah, automatically scales based on the demand and reducing the operational costs as well. So as you are not tied to resources, it's a serverless. So whenever there is a different scale of load, it will definitely scale automatically to meet those requirements. And as I said, it's triggered by various events. It could be HTTP, it could be schedule interval, it could be, let's say there is a ticket submitted into ServiceNow, and now you want to trigger one of the automation to do certain work based on whatever ServiceNow has inside the ticket, right? So the ServiceNow can call those Azure function as an API and do this work for you. But underneath what it's going to do, it's going to run your PowerShell script, right? Yep, and as it's running on top of Azure App Services, it provides that insight of monitoring, performance review, the logs and analytics, which hard to get when you run those scripts on premise, right? How many of you running the scripts on premise to do some ITSM or service requests or ticketing based automation? Yeah. How you quantify or take value out of that automation at the end of the year to show it to your leadership, saying, okay, I built this automation, it ran successfully, let's say 90% of time, and it has resolved this many issues or tickets throughout the period, and now I'm reducing the time and effort I'm putting into that specific task, right? So those kind of insights, when you have a monitoring and reporting tag to those resources, it's really helpful. And I think with moving those automation to the Azure function or Azure automation, I would say, it's easier for integrating those tools with that too, okay? So without further ado, and before we sleep, I would like to start with the demo so that we can keep ourselves awake. All right, so this demo, just want to say a quick bit about it. So I'm going to use PowerShell in Azure function, act as a worker, or I would say a brain behind that automation. But in a front end, so those PowerShell and Azure function work as a back end, but in a front end, I'm going to show you a Copilot Studio agent published in my Teams, talking to the end user, and how it resolves or help resolves email missing issue. So how many of you heard users complaining about, I did not receive my email? Almost everyone, right? Sometimes we face by ourselves, right? And how much time do you think it takes service desk to go ahead and search and help you find that email? Approximate time, anyone? Yeah? It's a good number. So let me start with this then. So this is the Copilot Studio agent named Cloudify Service Desk, published in my Teams. And this is not the agenda for this today. I'm just going to show you so that I can show you the end-to-end product, okay? So let's say, I say, hey, say, how can I help you today? I am missing an email from client, right? So think about I'm a user. I'm wearing the hat of the user. Rather than going and calling service desk or submitting a ticket directly, I say, okay, let me try saying how can the service desk agent helps me. So as you generally call service desk, what they do, they help you with some probing question. They ask you, okay, have you checked your junk? Have you checked your spam email? Or have you tried searching in your Outlook? Have you tried recreating your profile? So and so, right? So this agent helps showing you the same probing question and answer just to give you heads up, okay, have you tried all of this before you ask for further help? And it says, yes. I think I'm not satisfied with the answer which you showed me here, right? And I need further help. So when I say no, it's asking me, if you look here, it's asking me, please provide the sender email address. So I'm speaking in Nashville this Friday on one of the community event. And I was supposed to receive an email from them. And this was the original email address they sent me email like a couple of weeks ago. So I know their sender email address. And I was supposed to receive that email on last Friday. So after giving the sender email address, it's asking me what was the expected email delivery date. So I say last Friday, right? And please provide me the subject line. How would I know what's the subject line of that email, right? Only thing I can guess is it might be related to that community event. So it might have a word called Nashville into it. So I put Nashville, right? Now, as we generally reach out to customer care, they after you provide certain information, they confirm with you, right? Like the information which you provided is correct or not, correct? So this is the same thing, confirming like whatever information you provided is correct. It's not the best format. This is just a POC. But one interesting thing you might see here, the recipient email address is mine, right? I did not provide that information. And the reason I built this way is because I don't want anyone in my company to go ahead and search or submit the request to search missing email for me or for CEO or CDO, right? So whenever I talk to those service desk agent in my teams, I only work and submit requests for me, not for everybody else, right? But let's say I confirm the information provided here is correct. I click on yes. And now, here the journey begins, okay? It provided me the ticket number from one of the ticketing tool, but now I don't have ServiceNow, so I don't have those licenses. So what I use SharePoint list as a ticketing tool, just to show you how that ticket looks like, okay? So I'm just mimicking the real life scenario. So this is the ticket I submitted. It has all the information which I provided. And it has auto-generated this ticket number as generally ticketing tool do, right? And it has responded back to me as a user saying, okay, keep this ticket number and what? Then after, the same as service desk, right? Service desk people, this is ticket number. Someone will come from L1, L2 level or L3, L4 level, and they will do investigation. So missing email issue, who generally troubleshoot in your company? Anyone? Email admin, messaging admins, right? Who has access to maybe Action Online, Admin Console, or on-premise, right? Those are the people who actually work on it. And they have very specific permissions to run those tasks. So not a service desk L1, L2 people generally have those permissions. And whatever I'm saying right now, I'm going to correlate to the work which I'm going to show you and the PowerShell in Azure Function, right? All right, so now you see the message. We initiated the message trace for you, for your ticket number this, and this was your details, right? And this is again, the automation in the back end, doing the work for you, right? So when you see this is the time it triggers an API call to Azure Function where that message tracking script is written, and it has performed that message trace. And as you can see here, it has replied me, end user, right away, like not even 30 minutes, right? Saying, okay, we found your email to this was delivered on this time. I know this is very generic, not detailed, as this is a POC. But just think about it. When we started, someone told me that it could take around 35 minutes before someone get back to you what is going on with your email, right? So with the power of the automation end-to-end, you can have that to the end user by cutting the people in the middle and have that automation working for you. Now, on top of this, I'm just going to quickly show you this. Let's say email is in quarantine. Then we can show that here too. It's email in quarantine. If email is in quarantine, you can have, again, level of approval and different workflow connect to the same automation where you can say, okay, do you want it to release? If yes, then it requires security approval before they release that email, right? And so on and so forth, right? But consider I couldn't find that email, and now I really need to talk to a human because I cannot always talk to the agent or chat or AI, right? And that's where I can say, okay, I want to escalate this ticket to the human for further investigation. And as you can see here, there is a new chat, a group chat has been triggered with one of the real human service desk agent tagged to this user saying, okay, I'm here to help you. I have your case number. I have all the work which automation has done for you so far. And I can help you further finding that email if it is not in your Outlook. You might need to recreate your Outlook or so on and so forth, right? But at least that service desk agent will have the initial work done by the automation, right? Any questions so far? Because we're about to move to the slide, so. And I know it's not a PowerShell yet, but we're gonna deep dive into the PowerShell soon, so. Okay. All right. So what we did so far, okay, we use Teams to trigger a Copilot Studio agent, which is PowerShell, it used to call as a Power Virtual Agent. Now, as I said, I do lots of automation, but I take many products, work together, and use it as an integration to build end-to-end solutions, right? So in this product, I use Teams as a front end for a user to communicate with. Second, I use Copilot Studio Power Virtual Agent so that I can have that AI thing into the Teams. And then I have Power Automate and SharePoint List. So Power Automate is connecting the dots and having that flow between those agents and the ticketing tool, right? And SharePoint List I'm using as a ticketing tool. So this is the first flow where I submitted a ticket. The second flow is a little bit more complex, and it can be more complex. This is a very generic scenario I'm showing you today, so it might be not the one. But in this, there is a second flow trigger. Once ticket is submitted in the ticketing tool, consider as a ServiceNow. You have a ticket submitted in ServiceNow, and now ServiceNow calling Azure Function, right? But before ServiceNow call Azure Function, it might not be able to call that directly. So what I did, I used a Power Automate to submit or update the ticket, saying, okay, there's a new item created in a SharePoint, pull that new ticket, retry those details, let user know that I'm working on your ticket. So user is informed in every stage of the troubleshooting. And once it's ready, it triggers the Azure function and triggers that PowerShell script within that Azure function, which will do the message trace and reply back to the user at the end. All right, so now is the time for the Azure function and the PowerShell demo, in which I'm going to talk about the prerequisites. There is only two, I would say. If you're, how many of you use GUI versus Visual Studio Code for managing Azure? Yeah, okay. Both, yeah, as and when needed, right? Because there are some things you can't do from Visual Studio Code, so you need to rely on. Okay, good. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you how you create Azure Function app, which is, think like it's your computer. Before you run a script, you need to have a base machine, a server or a computer, to have that PowerShell installed on it, and then you create a script on it and store it and run it on a schedule, right? So we're gonna create the base first, which is Azure Function app, and on top of that, we'll create a function which will host your PowerShell scripts, and eventually we will run that script, we'll configure those settings, and we will run that script to show you how the back end of that, the automation works. Okay. So how many of you knows how to connect Visual Studio Code to Azure? Okay. Yeah. So basically what I did in my Visual Studio Code, I installed a couple of extensions, Azure Function extension, and some of the GitHub and the PowerShell. And then I went here, and basically I said, okay, let me go ahead and connect to the Azure here. I'm connected to one of my subscription. And there is a section called Function App. Okay. So I just right click on this, say create function app in Azure. Now there are two options here, the advanced and the basic. Basic will take all the default things and move forward. I would like to go with advanced so you know and we can discuss what are the options you can choose from. To build your machine, we are building the machine where you're going to run the script. Okay? It's not a VM, it's a serverless or any physical machine, but I'm just trying to match that analogy so that you know. So it's asking me to enter a unique global name, which is not matching with anyone else involved. So I'm going to say PowerShell Summit 2025 demo. Right? I'm going to copy that. Okay, it says token expiry. That's fine. Let me close and reopen. Right. Okay. Now, there is a different hosting plan because now you're, think about creating a VM and you have a different hosting plan, the same as in Azure Function app. You have different hosting plan, consumption-based, flex consumption, premium and app service plan. I think premium and app service plan are the most costlier ones. The one I'm going to choose today is consumption-based so that I don't need to worry about paying more for this demo. I'm going to use East US as the location for my resources. Now, Azure Function, it's not only for PowerShell. You can run different language or different scripts or code on Azure Functions, and there is a variety of them. The .NET, Node.js, Python, Java, you name it, right? I'm going to use this PowerShell 7.4. Now, there are two operating systems I can use, Windows and Linux. I'm going to stick to Windows for now. And now, as all those resources has to be somewhere, and as you know, in Azure, it has to be in a resource group. So I'm just creating a resource group to hold those objects. I'm going to give the same name as my Azure Function app. I'm going to create a storage account. Now, importance of the storage account, because all the execution and the logs and all the related information about this Azure Function app going to store somewhere. And that's where the storage account will be helpful. So I'm just going to create a new one. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned to monitor our scripts and automation, what do you use for now, for example, for your on-premise automation? Do you use any tool to monitor how your scripts are doing, how they are performing? Yeah? Okay. So in Azure, there's something called Application Insights. That is additional service, but you can opt for it and you can tag back those things to Application Insights. So basically what it does is give you the performance monitoring of your app or automation, how exactly it's doing, what are the resources being used, how many times it failed, right? What was the common cause for those failures and so on. So it's really helped when you have so many automations working at different levels and different scales. It helps you go and look into one specific one and try to figure out if there's anything which you can better, like response time or run time of this automation, anything you can improve, right? So I'm just going to create that too. And as you can see, it's currently performing a creation of that object for me, the function app. So once it will be ready, it will show up here in this section. Any questions so far? So the way I do is I generally group my Azure Function app. So it's like a one computer, right? And then you have multiple scripts and things on hosting on that. So let's say if there's a group of scripts which are tied to, let's say, Exchange, I try to keep them under, same Azure Function app so that I can use manage identity with that specific app to run different script within that scope, right? So if you have multiple resources or requirements for automation and scripts, you can have multiple Azure Function app. So while this is going on, let me show you another video. Right? Okay, so this is what we did. We started with the user, AI agent in a Teams, and all the FAQs and all the knowledge base you have in your SharePoint or Confluence or wherever your knowledge base is. And then we have a service now which calls the API. I use Power Automate, but you can use Logic Apps as well. And for every different service request you comes in ServiceNow, you can have different storage queues. And the reason for this is making your automation state full so that even your script fails, you don't lose the track where you were, how far you reach. So think about the automation of onboarding user. There are so many subtasks into that, right? And when you're tracking those tasks, it's important to track which tasks are completed. And if there is a failure in between, where to restart that. We're going to come back to this at very end, but let me see if I have the PowerShell. Yeah, so as you can see here, it has created a Azure Function app successfully, and it's here. It's going to show up. So right now, there is no PowerShell script loaded into this, but I need one because I want to achieve that message tracking which I ran before, right? But before I do that, let me create a local code for that Power function. So the way you do it, create a function. So creating a function, nothing but creating a script or a code which you can load into that app, which is a computer. Right? So so what we created a base infrastructure to run that PowerShell script inside, and now I'm going to create a configuration and that PowerShell script so that I can run it, right? So to do that, I created a local workspace so I can modify the changes as we go and eventually deploy that script or that function into the function app. I know it's confusing, function and function app, but the terminology they used is it's not the great, but I would say function is the script and function app is think about your server or computer, okay? So now the function, which your PowerShell script is, there are different ways to call that script, right? And one of them is HTTP trigger, which is widely used. And that's what I use in my demo as well, in my POC. So HTTP is like you making an API call. API is most popular now. You might have attended a session yesterday or today on APIs, how to build your own APIs, right? So calling that API is like HTTP post or request, and you get the response from those APIs. The same thing here. There's a time trigger. You can schedule the script to run. You don't need to wait for anyone to trigger that. You can have Azure function, which is your scripts, run on schedule for you, all right? The same way, if you have anything into, let's say, SQL or storage queue manager or events in Event Hub, where you want to do certain action when there is some issue or events happening. So think about the scenario. It's funny, but let's say you want to shut down all your test VM or in dev environment when price of the VM or consumption of the VM go beyond certain amount, right? So you can have that coded here and you can trigger that Azure function through that event. So for now, I'm going to use HTTP trigger and I'm going to make that function, I'm going to make that name as HTTP1. I'm going to say function. That's the authorization label I'm giving them, and it's being created right now. So as you can see, there's two functions here. One is the one which is old one I created before, and it's going to have the script. But the second one is the HTTP trigger one, which I just created, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the local explorer where I'm going to make some changes. So the first change, how do you run Exchange Online PowerShell on your computer? What do you need to run that? Anyone? Yeah, you need account, you need modules. So now you have your base machine, which is Azure Function app. How are you going to have those modules installed on it? So there is a PSD1 called requirements.psd1 where you mention, okay, these are the things you need to have whenever you load that or whenever you start your Azure Function app. Whenever you boot your computer, these are the modules will be there to use in your script into the function. So I mentioned I need AZ account to authenticate, right? I need managed service identity because I'm not going to use a service account. I'm not going to use username and password to authenticate against Exchange Online. Instead, I'm going to use managed service identity, which is basically I'm saying I'm authenticating as an app to access Exchange Online resources. And the role I'm going to assign to that as Exchange Online administrator. But I'm going to show you that steps as well. But to run those commands, these are the modules are required and the versions of those modules. So this is to make sure the base computer or the function app has those modules for you to use. Now there's another one I wanted to show you guys is, one second. This file, the host.json. This is also an important file. which is automatically created when you create your Azure Function and Azure Function app. Most importantly, this guy, the manage dependencies. If this is disabled, even though you configure the requirements into that requirements PSD1 to load those modules, if I set it false, it will not load it. So it's like whenever your computer starts, it checks for this setting, saying, okay, do I need to manage the dependency or are you going to do it on your own? If I say true, it will check that requirement.psd1 file and it will read all the modules are required from that file and load them. Yes. So there are scenarios where you go and install certain version of modules to start with, like mostly in the dev and test environments, before you go further with the production. In a production, I highly recommend that. Yeah. So let's say there's a new PowerShell module coming up and it's in preview. You don't know how it's going to react. You want to start with your dev and test environment, right? And you don't want that dev and test environment to load those modules on their own. You want to have that loaded for that, then you can have it. Okay. So that is again an important file. So there is a correlation between requirements.psd1 and host.json, right? Now the code thing. So I'm gonna use one of the existing code to show you how the code look like. I'm not gonna tell you how to write a PowerShell. You guys know already. So I'm not gonna deep dive into it, but there are some of the things I'm going to show you here. It's using a .NET underneath, as you know, the PowerShell. So that's how we define or configure PowerShell script into Azure Function. So whatever the namespace you're using, you need to start with that. So system.net is one of that. Yes. So when you run a PowerShell on your computer, you don't mention that, because it's there in Windows by default, right? But in Azure Function, you have to define that using namespace system.net to let it run. Yes, most of the time, unless you're dealing with any other than the .NET. Yeah. Then you define your parameters, because when you run a script, you enter your parameters manually, or maybe you hard-coded them somewhere to read it, right? But in Azure Function, you're going to get those parameters as an input through the API. So you remember now, if you remember the demo I showed you earlier, user entered the information. In a Teams chat, it goes to the ticket, and from the ticket, it goes to this API or this function. So how I'm going to get that object? So whatever information I get while someone calling that API, that information will come as request. So all those 4 attributes or information which has been passed to this Azure function stored into the request. And then after, what I'm doing is I'm bifurcating those information and storing those value in the individual variables. So request.sender email, right? But important thing to note here is body. Because when someone requests something in an API, they always submit a body of that request, right? So the information will be like request.body. Whatever the information you're looking for. So sender email, expected email delivery date, recipient email address, and the subject line, right? So those are the information we fetch from that body and store it into the variable. Now you might see here, I'm writing host. After every variable, I'm writing like host into the host file or into the screen, right? When we do PowerShell, we do sometimes to debug, to see what variables we are at, what the value is calculating, if there isn't not the correct value, and so on, right? But this is the serverless, and it's going to keep running on its own. So why I need to use that here, right? I'm going to show you why we need that, because eventually this is a script you might need to debug. And when you don't have that Windows console where you're running the script and seeing those things happening real time, it will be hard to troubleshoot. So having that right host thing will tell you what phase of the script are you in. Also, it's not only showing that information on the screen in a subscreen, but it will also store that information into one of the debug log, which I'm going to show you in the later stage of the presentation, right? So this is very important piece of the thing which makes different than the regular PowerShell work we do. Another important thing, I don't know how many of you do a message trace in the past. Has anyone performed a message tracking? Yeah? When user asks you that I was supposed to receive email today, do you do message tracking only for today? No, right? Yeah, so what I did here, when user told me I supposed to receive email on Friday, I said, no, I don't trust you. I added 2 days extra before and after just for demo purpose, but you can expand that range if you want to. So that way I am not missing and rerunning the script, and I'm not making that automation fail, right? I'm predicting some of the stuff and I'm putting into the logic itself, yeah? And at the end, I'm connecting Action Online. Now, another important piece is, now Azure or Action Online doesn't accept the username and password where it used to be before if you're running through app, right? You have to have managed identity. So, and I'm going to show you how to configure that as well, but that's how we are using it. I'm saying connect Action Online through the managed identity as an app, like this app, which is Azure Function app, and run this script, right? So basically it says, okay, connect Action Online. So it's going to connect to Action Online. If it is success, I'm storing the status. And I'll tell you why I'm storing this status, okay? Because it's not like human. When we run a script manually, we know if it's successful or not. I want to capture those information every stage of the script. So when I go back to the user at the end of the automation, I can tell the user, okay, it was successful, it was fail. If it is a failure, I want to notify the admins saying, okay, this automation job ran, it failed on this action, this was the error message, right? So every detail in the script is very important. And then at the end, I'm running the get-message trace. As you know, it's a common command. There's nothing new in that. But yeah, at the end, based on whatever the number of message I found, I'm just preparing the message so that I can use that message as an output and send back to the user if it is a success. If I find the message, or if I couldn't find the message, or if the message is in quarantine, or so and so forth. But if it is a failure, then I simply go ahead and say, okay, this is not going to work. I might need to reach out to admin. Yeah. Yeah. So at the end, we disconnect the session, so we don't keep that Action Online session running. And this is another important piece, because now you are running PowerShell script within that Azure function, which is serverless, right? How are you going to get information out of it, right? And so this is the block of this code which put all your output, whatever the variable you define earlier in the script, you can use those variable and you can output it back to whoever requested that API. So let's say, think about it. ServiceNow call that Azure function as an API, requesting, okay, do the message trace. And at the end, ServiceNow is going to wait for that output because it has to update it into the ticket, right? So that output going to help back as a response to whoever has called that API or that function, and that information will be used by that requester for further processing, whatever they want to do, right? Yes, that's correct. This is the one. No, it comes with the .NET and the Azure function. You don't need to install any module for that. So even without installing any Exchange module, which I showed you before, this comes by default. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And any questions so far? No. All right. So the next thing, I'm going to show you the manage identity. So manage identity, you need to connect to the graph, Microsoft Graph, and then you need to have your tenant ID, and you need to have the app ID, which is basically your Azure Function app ID. I'm going to show you how to get that. So remember we created this PS Summit 2025 demo, the Azure Function app, right? You can right click on that. You can click on properties. And over here, you can search for ID. Sometimes it's not visible here quickly. Then I generally do this way too. I'm just going to show you. I know it's a GUI, but it might be quicker to show up there. All right. Function app. Function app demo. And identity. So it's not visible because by default it's not enabled. So I'm going to assign system assigned identity. So there are two kinds of identity you can use. One is system assigned managed identity, and another is user assigned. So the difference is when you use system assigned managed identity, it's tied to this resource, which means it's tied to this Azure app. So as soon as this Azure app is you delete it, that identity will be deleted. It's not there anymore. So it automatically manages all the authentication, all the token initiation, and so on. Whereas user assigned identity think of a scenario where you need to use this same account on multiple scripts to manage different resources. Not only Action Online, but you have multiple scripts. One is running for Action Online to create the mailbox. One is to assign Teams policy or creation. One is to assign M365 license, and so on and so forth. So there are different scripts on different computer or objects, and you want all of them wanted to have with one single identity. Then you can assign user managed identities. So for now, I'm going to say yes, enable it. I'm going to say system assign. As soon as I do this, it's going to give me the GUID. Yeah, I'm going to copy that GUID here. And I'm going to replace that GUID into the code I was showing you earlier. So I'm just going to put it here. And the next one is I'm connecting to the graph with the specific scope. We're going to read write, read all, and so on, and for the specific tenant. And then after, I'm defining specific resource ID. So because I want to manage Exchange Online through this app, I'm specifying specific app ID, which is unique for, doesn't matter which tenant you are, this GUID or this value is unique for every tenant who has Exchange Online. Okay? So it's like tied to that service, right? And then after, this GUID is giving you further value of what role you want to assign, right? And that role is nothing but your Exchange Online administrator. Yep, and then at the end, I'm running that command, new service principal role assignment, so that I can create the role assignment, and then after I can assign that role to that specific app. So when I run this, what exactly it's going to do, it's going to create that role and assign Exchange Online to that role, and that role will be assigned to that app. So now app will have Exchange Online administrator role, and it will act as app to access all the Exchange Online administrator thing. So let me run this, see how it goes. By the way, this is not my code. I want to give a credit to Laura. It's a very public article. So there's nothing I created. This is one of the code she wrote, and I'm just using it here. Okay. I'm not going to install the graph module because I already have it. But if you don't have it, please. All right, so it's created. Now it has ID and stuff. So majority of work has been done. Only thing is pending is copying the script. So I have already wrote a script in one of the PS1 here. We can copy it. We can put it into the run.ps1. So run.ps1 is the file which is going to execute when you call that function app, right? So it's basically a name of your function. And another thing I did which is different, just going to show you, is this guy. I added this value because anywhere I go, I need to have some variables defined and hard-coded. I can programmatically call the specific function and find that value, but just for simplicity, just to show you, I have hard-coded tenant value here so that I don't need to redefine it again and again, and I can leverage that variable. Yep, so I think we're good there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to publish. I'm going to publish this or deploy this function which I created locally. I'm going to publish that script into the Azure. So I'm going to use specific subscription where I have that function app created. I'm going to use that specific PowerShell Global Submit demo. It's asking me to deploy. I say yes, deploy. And we might see some failure. And that's where my next topic will be. How are we going to troubleshoot that? What are the things to look for? Because when you're working on a computer or server, you know where to go, how to look for the logs, and so on and so forth. You can run it, troubleshoot it. How about do it the same thing in Azure Function? Okay, it says deployment successful, but strange, it still shows the 2 out of 4. So while this is going on, I already have the similar app created. Okay, it succeeded. Okay, great. Now, okay, it's failed. Strange. Over here it succeeded and over here it says failed. Let me refresh. And while it's loading, let me go back here and just validate whatever I did on the Visual Studio Code is showing here correctly. So under the app files, you'll see all the the files JSON, host.json and requirement.psd1 and so on and so forth. But you keep seeing this message. Whenever you create or manage Azure Function app through your Visual Studio Code, this is very important to know. I learned it very hard way. And there's very less documentation on this specific thing unless you know where to look at. So when you manage your app or create your app from Visual Studio Code and you try to go to portal and try to manage it there or try to test it from the portal, it will not allow you to do it. Even it will not allow you to do it correctly with the managed identity. The reason is this specific thing, website run from package. This is one of the environment variables in an app setting, which got created when you create this app through Visual Studio Code programmatically, right? And it is enabled right now, which means I can only manage this package here. What it's going to do, because it's going to make that whole app read-only, when I enable manage identity, it's supposed to store those tokens and variables for the manage identity onto the app, onto that storage of those app. Now, as that app become read-only because of this variable, manage identity will never work. So what I just did, I set from 1 to 0 so that manage identity can trigger and have those token and things accessed. I'm going to show you that too, where it is stored. So once that is done, I think we are good with the testing. Let me see if we can test it now. Save it. Apply, confirm. All right. So now you see here, there are two functions which is loaded. One of the default one, HTTP, and one of the get message trace. Now get message trace has all the code. It's not showing here, which is weird. How about HTTP trigger one? No, it's not. That's okay. So it happens sometimes. I observed recently when I'm managing these things through Visual Studio Code. So it's always good to validate whenever you do something like this. And if you run a test and it doesn't work, make sure you go to the GUI and just to see those script or whatever things you deployed, it loaded correctly. And this is like a one-time thing when you initiate those things, right? But now it has not. I'm going to use one of my existing function app to show you how it is configured, okay? So get message trace, that's a PowerShell script. I hope this will load. Okay, perfect. So the same PowerShell script which I created in Visual Studio Code, I published, deployed here. There is no change here. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to test this, right? So when I test this, I need to provide a body for the HTTP call. Remember, when I created this app, when I created this function, I said it will be HTTP trigger, which means only HTTP call can trigger this function or the script. And when I trigger that, I need to pass certain information to that. And I'm passing that information in JSON in the format, like sender email, recipient email address, and so on. And this is the same exact format which I got from my ticketing tool, right? So think about it. Now, I don't have, as an IT, I might not manage all the applications in my environment. So there might be a different ServiceNow team who manage the ServiceNow. They call my APIs and do the work. So when I build an automation, only thing I need to know is what information they're going to pass to my API, which I need to use in my automation, in my Azure function, right? So for this specific POC, what I need these 4 things, considering I'm not the ServiceNow guy, right? And I can still test my automation working fine or not, right? So I'm just going to say run. Right now it should be creating a session, as you can see at the bottom here. something happening, right? Now you see the information. It will not show up if you don't put right host, okay? And you will be like wondering, my script is running, but it doesn't show anything. Either it shows error or it doesn't show anything, right? So it's connected to Exchange. And as you can see as an output here, yeah, we got the message. We got what happened to the connection, what happened to the disconnect of the session. All of those things are success, so I'm good, right? So this is one of the testing. Now think about this is failed and you want to troubleshoot it. Where are you going to look for, right? So, and before we go there, let me see if there is anything. One more important thing to configure, which is recently started. I started observing like last week, is this setting. There's one more important setting. When you're running from the browser and when you created it on premise, where is it? Course API. You need to mention this. This is weird. I'm still going to talk to the product team to understand what was the reason they introduced this. But in a nutshell, what is saying it, if you want to trigger this API or this Azure function, you need to, if you want to run it from specific portal, you need to mention that portal here. So I had to mention that portal.azure.com. That's where I'm going and logging into and running this specific function. If I disable this, if I remove this entry, it will not allow me to run the test. I can still create this Azure function, but when I try to test that, it will say you cannot test it from this Edge browser because your browser is Java supported so-and-so. So you need to go to this cross-domain entry and whitelist that thing here, okay? Just saving some of your time troubleshooting the issues, okay? Now going back to, now think about the scenario where you need to actually look at the logs, see what is going on. On your computer, when you don't see the module installed, even though you have installed, what you do? How do you know the module is installed? Anyone? Yeah, let's say if it doesn't show, it's still showing fail. What else you can do? Yeah, can you go in a Windows Explorer and really see if the module is really there or not, right? Correct? So similar thing. So there's advanced tools called Kudu. It's like Kudu is like an engine which connects your app with the storage and some diagnostic logs, help you visualize and run some commands if you want to, like a console, and give you the space to look at those details. So, and here are all the details. For example, where is this site? Because this app, this function has to be hosted somewhere, right? So where is this hosted? So it's under identity. So all your files are here, right? Requirement.psd1. So if I click on this, you'll see. Right? Same way, remember I mentioned if you're managing or creating the Azure function from Visual Studio Code, it makes it read-only and doesn't allow manage identity to authenticate with Action Online or any other objects you want to. This one is this, identity service. If your function app is read-only because of your managing from Visual Studio Code and that attribute is set to 1, this will not be created. Even you run that PowerShell script to enable manage identity, it will not be populated. And because this is not here, there will be always authentication issue. It will tell you, I could not get authorization for manage identity to run this app for Action Online. And even though you run your manage identity script to grant those roles and permissions and everything to that app, it will still not give you. You will stop, it will go spinning, wondering why it is happening. Just because this folder is missing. Why it is missing? Because when you did manage identity, the whole function app was read-only, because you manage all the things from Visual Studio Code. Now, you might be wondering, why can't we manage this manage identity from Visual Studio Code itself, right? I tried that. There is no direct option. I couldn't find it. So for example, over here, you see manage identity, right? There's no option. There are some PowerShells, but not like this, like what I'm showing you right now, okay? So another important thing I'd like to show you in Kudu, which is there are deployment logs. There are some diagnostic JSON and settings, but most importantly, the log files, the application, the functions. This is the function and all the text-based log files. So if you click on here, whenever you run that script, it will log those things here. And now you realize the right host which I was doing in my script, this is the place where it tracks everything it runs and do. So in case if I need to go back and see when it was failed, what happened, and so on and so forth, you can come here and you can have the detail logs. You can look into it, right? The same way, if I need to check the modules are really loaded or installed or not, right? There's something called data. In data, you can go to manage dependency. Now remember, there is an attribute I showed earlier that if you enable it, it manages the dependency on its own, load those modules, right? It gets loaded here. You can see all the modules are loaded. Even I can go and check which version of Exchange Online management module was installed. 3.7.2. I don't know if we can go detail inside, but yeah, there is, you can go deep into it as well. It's the same as like your Windows folders and directory structure, where you can go and check the modules are there or not, right? So let me go back to the slideshow. Any questions so far before we go further? I know it's not, it's a PowerShell, but it's still not a PowerShell where you like, so I'm just trying to show you there are tools and automation which is in the cloud which you can leverage to host your scripts and your automations. That's the whole idea. I tried searching in TechNet and user groups. I couldn't find it, so I'm going to reach out to the product group and see if there is anything there or if they can publish it somewhere. So but if you search that individually, that record manage from code equal to 1. If you search that specific string in a Google, you'll find the significance of that. It will tell you having that enabled set as 1. Will make your app as read-only. Whatever is under that configuration, it will be read-only. You cannot manage directly from GUI, and you cannot test it in a GUI. So the way I find it is, I was having one app I created directly from GUI and app one from created through Visual Studio Code. The one with the GUI was working fine with Manage Identity. The same exact one created with Visual Studio Code was not. And I started comparing every piece of configuration, and I realized, okay, this is one of the things which is not there in the GUI. What is the significance of that? And when I read about it, then I realized it is read-only, and that's the reason it was never a manage identity token stored onto that function. So if it is not written, which means it's not gonna use it. Yeah. So what we learned so far, what is different running a PowerShell on-premise versus on Azure Function or Azure Automation? So loading modules is different, right? You don't run install module commands. You just specify it under requirements.psd1 and it's get loaded, right? Input parameters and variables. So you can store your variables in environment variables. Also, you can store it within the script, which I won't recommend. But you can also pass the information through API request body when you call those functions, right? Which I showed you how to call it. Also, you can store your credential and sensitive information in Azure Key Vault, because Azure Function not only allowed to talk to external online, but it can connect to storage, SQL in Azure, you name it, right? There are different connection strings you can create. You can do almost anything within that group of Azure features. Output parameters, that's another different thing which you don't do on your on-premise, right? Unless you have multi-level script where you store those output variable in, let's say, one of the table in SQL, and the next script read that table value and process it further and so on and so forth, right? So the output parameters are very important. Different types of triggers, right? Do you trigger your PowerShell on-premise using HTTP API call? No, right? There are more than 10, I think, triggers you can configure to have those script called. And that's the beauty of it. So think about people working in security or disaster recoveries. Look, if they are looking for specific events, and when those events occurs, they want to do certain action, right? This is the best thing to start with, right? You know the trigger, you set the trigger, identify those values, run the Azure functions or automations, and have those things done, right? Think about the scenario where there is an email needs to be blocked at org level in action online. Someone report to service desk, then it goes to messaging, or someone might reach out to that messaging guy, it logs into it, do certain things, right? Or if the security guy is having access, they might do it. Think about the scenarios where it identifies based on what are the analytics tools which you have in security, and you have a workflow defined, calling these Azure functions with your scripts, doing those actions for you. But you might think, not every automation is direct. Let's say why someone wants to go ahead and block and allow without any approval. I agree. And that's why there is a beauty of different tools integrating with each other. You can have Logic app, you can have Power Automate to create that approval workflow in between, right? So that when there is a request, if it is critical, which is high impact, you have that approval flow in between before you actually trigger those APIs or those functions, right? So different thing is debug log and troubleshooting. The way you troubleshoot into on-premise PowerShell is not the same as Azure Function. It's a little bit different. It's not totally different, but there is a different ways to do it, right? And security. You can have MFA. You don't need it in this one because it's a managed identity, but you can have so many things which is more secure and more highly available in Azure than your on-premise. And yeah, I forgot to show you the app inside, the monitoring piece. Let me go back and show you guys that. So you see this? This is also app insights. It's a dashboard tied to my Azure app automation or that function. I don't run it every day. Whenever I run the POC, I show it. But if your automation is running every day many times, there might be lots of data to show you here. But important ones are, what are the response time, right? If there is any failure, so on and so forth. right? Responsiveness. And you can change this. You can have this dashboard available to you. You can report it. You can export the data, right? Because at the end of the day, the automation you're going to build, if you cannot derive the value, if you cannot show or present the value, what automation brings to your team or your company or to your client, there is very less buyer, right? There's always a hard sell. Okay. So I have built this for one of the clients, but I thought it's good to show you as one of the use case. Think about onboarding user and offboarding user. How many different components you touch when you onboard and offboard a user? This is very bare minimum component I'm talking about, right? Starting from on-premise Active Directory, Azure AD, Exchange, and Microsoft 365. They're very basic. If you have many more applications and so on, you might need more, right? So how are you going to build and integrate all of this together, right? You cannot go and work with them ever, right? So you might have different scripts which runs one thing for Azure AD, one for Exchange, one for that, but how can you make a orchestration of that, right? And that's where there are two things you can do in Azure. Either you can create Azure function with the orchestration on top of it, where you can say, okay, these are the 5 or 4 Azure function runs in a sequence or run in parallel, or I think there's a fallback. There are different methods. But there's another way, it's called Azure automation, where you can configure a runbook where you define all these tasks and you do it, right? So yeah, so let me show you that too. And I'll come back to you for your question. Same question? Let me know if you see it. I did not configure in my POC, but there is something called hybrid connection and express route. You can have your Power Automate talking to your on-premise Active Directory and Exchange server to do certain tasks if you want to. Is
that an Azure function, hybrid connection?
Yes, it's, yes. Yes. Sorry? I don't know. I can check and get back to you, but I don't know. I couldn't find it. I see most of the clients I work with, they either have express route or hybrid connection, because hybrid connection and express route not only used for Azure function, but it can be also used for other things too. Like, let's say express route, they use it for Office 365 connecting to their on-premise and other applications too. But yeah, there is a way to do it. So you can have Azure function not only managing your cloud objects, but also the on-premise one too. Yeah. Okay.
That hybrid connection, that's different from like Azure Automation's hybrid worker.
I hardly use that, but
I don't either, but I just know that you, like for Azure Automation, you need like a runbook worker or an agent on a server or something. How does this one get set up?
So this one requires a firewall changes, and this is mostly cloud-based. So I can show you if we have time. But basically,
Does it need like any kind of agent on a server?
it does. It does. It does. It does. So I see Azure Automation. Even before Azure Automation was there is a protocol, System Center Orchestrator. We call it Scorch. I don't know. Has anyone used that? Okay. Yeah. So if anyone is using it and want to migrate to the cloud, then Azure Automation is the best bet, because that product is version 2029, like 2019 is going out of support in a couple of years. So, but yeah. System Center Orchestrator. That's a different product, on-premise product. Okay. Yeah, so the way I look at it is, I look at, when I talk to my client, or my team as well, I look at automation as a product rather than one-time thing, right? Because it's, as you know, like, and we listen to many sessions today as well, like CI/CD pipeline. It's continuous, right? You cannot stop one time and go, right? So, but there are a few important things which I learned over a period of time is, have you identified new things? If you are in a business, right? If you need to create a business case to justify the leadership, and how you build that, right? The best bet to start with is IDSM reports. Yeah, so your ticketing tool are your best friend. If you can generate a report or ask for the report from your service desk, what are the top 10 ticket generator for your team or for your company, and pick few of them as a high value, which you can quickly win and deliver as automation. That's the best bet. Now, as an automation as a product, so client comes to me and say, okay, I want to build automation because everyone is doing it, for example. And I always ask question back, do you fit any of this criteria? Because if you are not value driven, because what are you trying to do by automating the task? Let's say group creation, right? If you are creating a group through automation, whenever users submit the request, if you're creating shared mailbox creation or management of group permissions or membership and so on and so forth, right? If you couldn't quantify how many automations you run or how many requests you did in a year or 6 months, you're not going to present the value out of it, what value you're getting out of it. Some automations are saving time. Some are for reducing the resource. Some of them are for time constraint purpose, not for saving time, but it's very critical. So it has to be very quickly, right? Security automations, right? And it has to be user-friendly. So if you look at the product or POC, which I showed you today, automation, we build automation just thinking, okay, this is a code, and we build it. But how it's going to relate to the user experience, right? So in this POC, I showed you how the front end is correlating to my back end, where Azure function is, right? User doesn't care what you're doing in a PowerShell, right? Because they don't have that technical knowledge. We do have it. So, and having that human factor integrated with the PowerShell and building it with that sense will really helpful. Easy to maintain, because right now we building it. Tomorrow we go to the next level and someone replace us and they try to maintain that. So it's always important we follow the best practices of maintaining those code. Secure enough so we can make our security team happy. Easy to integrate and auditable and reporting. So audit is very important. So anything goes wrong, you should be able to track back and find out where it was done, who did it, how it happened, right? And that's where having your automation in Azure is very critical, because everything you do is logged. Even the managed identity runs some commands. You can go to the sign-in log where you can see those things. You can go to Exchange Online Logs to see what level of editing it has done, right? That's the beauty. And there are different ways to do the same automation which I showed you today. So I believe there are two pieces of the automation. One is initiator. Who initiate the script? Who initiate the function? Who initiate the API, right? And there is a backend which I call processor. Who process those things? Who get those information and process it, right? So you have forms, like Microsoft Forms, which is again a great way to input for the users. Adaptive cars, SharePoint lists, API calls, chatbots, right? And in processor, you can have Power Automate, PowerShell for sure, Logic App, and Azure Functions. And again, you can have more in this. This is just few. So if you don't have like any questions before we go to this. Yeah.
Kind of touched on a little bit, I guess, just that, I guess you said you haven't really used Azure automation much, but like I'm just trying to understand maybe the differences between Azure Functions and Azure automation and the runbooks and like why or whether you would choose one or the other.
So Azure Automation is kind of a runbook where you have end-to-end flow, where you define many tasks, like Visio, right? I mentioned, okay, you do this, then you go there, there. Like you define a whole flow. And each flow, like each item of the flow call as activity. And in that activity, you can have scripts, you can have different functions defined into it, doing different tasks. So it goes in that way. Whereas Azure Function, you run specific thing, you stop. You generate something, you stop. Now, recently they started doing orchestration in Azure Function itself. And you can have one more layer of script saying, okay, there are 5 Azure functions, you can run it in different sequence and so forth. But there are different use cases like that, okay? So 5 minutes, if you guys want to join the quiz, I'll not take much of the time. Just 1 minute. Oh, you good? Oh, okay. 3 minutes? Okay, I'll do it quickly. Or else I'll end this. We good? Yep, all correct. Let me go to the interesting one so that we can test one quick knowledge. Okay, yeah, this is the one, if anyone wants to answer. And I'll wrap up this. Yep. Okay, host or Jason. Yep, Q trigger. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. I might have more time then. But yeah, Tyson, who's that? Good job. Jorik, Gabe, Arachi, and Sushil. Thank you so much. Please go to the QR code or go to your app and let me know how I did it. Okay? Thank you so much.